about the capability of North Korea to still develop missiles even with economic crisis?
Well, it means they are used to the sanctions that the difficulty that they have been facing. They learned how to overcome these difficulties, and I mean these sanctions have been long-ranging, have been existing for many decades. So they knew how to circumvent them, and so they know how to manage that kind of crisis. It's not the first time they have been facing such a crisis or economic hardship. They have always faced this kind of crisis. They have always faced this kind of economic hardships. Even to this time or to this level. The fact that is surprising is they would come out and even say it. But you got to give kudos to their political propaganda machinery. I mean, they have been able to drill into the heads of their people that despite all of the suffering, they need to defend the sovereignty of their state, and that America is their worst enemy, being aided by South Korea and their neighboring countries like Japan. They have been successful in putting that. So sometimes, because of that kind of nationalism that they have, you rather sacrifice yourself and go hungry than to see your state sovereignty go away. So that's a very important mechanism that they are using in order to avoid any kind of backlash from the citizens towards the government. So that mechanism works for them. So this is not a one-time thing or having hardship new to North Korea. All that they are seeing is how are they going to circumvent that, and that is not going to stop them from developing their intercontinental ballistic missile program or continue with the development of cruise missiles. So they are showing that, look, despite these challenges we are overcoming, we have been successful. The only other surprising part is that this particular cruise missile test didn't show up on the headlines of their national newspaper. That kind of gives it a little bit of a shaky red flag right there.
And it's interesting you mentioned how South Korea is circumventing these sanctions, because the United Nations Security Council sanctions forbids North Korea from testing ballistic missiles and not necessarily cruise missiles. And North Korea was being strategic doing this, knowing that it has not violated any international law. So what mechanism then can be used to hold North Korea accountable?
Well, implementing such a mechanism would be difficult because you will need the United Nations Security Council to approve that kind of measure, which is to ban them from testing any kind of missile, including a cruise missile. So, and I can tell you clearly, China and Russia are going to veto any resolution from any country at the United Nations Security Council that would prevent North Korea from testing missiles. Morally, it's going to be very difficult for America. We have seen America's ally, which is Israel, being able to develop such technological capacities. But America always insists, president after president, that Israel has the right to defend itself. We can hear the same kind of defense and tone and wording coming from Russia and China, being allies to North Korea at the United Nations Security Council. Now, what is interesting is that, it will be foolish, if not very amateurish, for anybody to think that North Korea testing a cruise missile is not something serious. Of course, when you hear of the word intercontinental ballistic missiles, people are like, wow, that is serious. But even cruise missiles need warheads. And then North Korea, it would be foolish for anybody to think that they don't have the capacity or the capability to develop that. And most importantly, a cruise missile may not be as long-ranging as intercontinental ballistic missiles. But the dangerous part of it is that it flies at low levels, which means it is very hard to detect with radars.
And this last statement you just made is perhaps why the United Nations doesn't consider cruise missile as much of a threat as ballistic missiles. But isn't it time to have a review of that? I'm seeing that ballistic missiles are just as effective in terms of causing death to people as ballistic missiles, as much as it doesn't have much payload, as you will see the ballistic missile. But this particular cruise missile can reach Japan.
I would say the levels of destruction are about the same, but the range of capability in terms of destruction may be different. So, and that is where I think the math is. And a lot of countries, yes, especially advanced and first world countries, have these cruise missiles. So it's going to be very difficult if you look at international politics today, even back then, to be able to put a treaty that everybody can agree on, like the non-nuclear proliferation treaty, for example. It's going to be very difficult to have that on something like cruise missiles. It means we're talking about a lot of countries having to give up some of their most important assets. So that's going to be very difficult to achieve. but they can set certain kind of agreements. I mean, which I think the Iran the JSOC, which is the Iran nuclear deal, kind of gives a sort of a an idea or a roadmap how that could be achieved. I mean, if when countries have organizations like NATO and regional bodies like that, it's also a way to achieve that. That is more something that could be done at more of a regional level where there's regional cooperation. But right now, with all the divide, I mean, it's going to be difficult to even achieve that at regional level. But it will be a good point in start for the United Nations to start working on something like that at regional level. It's a difficult task, but it's not something that they cannot do. But it's going to take decades to accomplish.
And why does the US, Japan, and South Korea not have the ability to monitor these tests in real time?
I mean, North Korea is very, very secretive nation. So it's very difficult to gain intelligence from them. A lot of resources go into covert operations in terms of getting information from North Korea. Most of the time, the United States and its allies, the information that they get comes from defectors, people that have been inside. And we know that the borders of North Korea are heavily protected. You risk dying if you try to escape. And majority of the time, the people that escape North Korea are women. So they first have to try to escape the country, go to China, and then try to reach other parts of the world from there. So that is how they often get their intelligence. So it's going to be very, very difficult to get reports as to when, where, and how certain things are going to happen. They tend to happen, then you know it. I mean, or if somebody defects and is a higher level individual or somebody who works in one of the plants can tell you what they are working on or what they are developing and what the timeline is, and then they can put their cues and clues together to say, okay, we know that they are going to test this at this particular time. So it's very difficult to get real-time intelligence information coming from North Korea because of how secretive that state is.
And do you think that the Biden administration should perhaps reopen talks with North Korea like we saw in the Trump administration?
Absolutely. I think they can open, I believe that they should, in fact, open talks with North Korea. If they can open talks with Iran and during the Obama administration, and in fact, were able to reestablish diplomatic relations with Cuba, I see no reason why. Having most of the people coming from the Obama administration also being in the Biden administration and being in the same White House will not use the same approach and the same tactic to start engaging and talking to the North Koreans. Now, maybe one may say, okay, look, the way the Trump administration handled this was not the best way, but you got to give them kudos for having unprecedented international foreign policy and in the diplomatic world, which includes talks with North Korea and even having been able to negotiate for Israel to have allies with countries in the Middle East. That is groundbreaking. So if they must look at what the Trump administration did well, and they have to look at what the Trump administration didn't do very well, and be able to learn from that and create or chart a pathway that they can engage North Korea. I think the same way that Trump did visit South Korea and even kind of stepped across the border and stepped into North Korea was a very good gesture. It was absolutely a great move. I can see Biden doing that, and it would be great if the North, the South, and the United States can meet at the demilitarized zone and just meet over at that table and have a conversation would be a good starting point.
A development to watch in the. Thank you so much for talking to us, Fatih.
My pleasure.